I stayed at the legendary Overnight Hotel by Grace Omega. I'm sure you've all heard the stories about the overnight. There have been so many of them that they've settled into cliché. The weary tourist, footsore and badly in need of accommodation, stumbles onto a hotel or a guest house or a cabin and has the best sleep of their lives. Then, when they get home, they discover that no one else has ever heard of the place. If they return to where they found it, it's either nothing or a crumbling, abandoned building that's been derelict for decades. I didn't set out to find the overnight. No one who has gone looking for it deliberately has ever found it. It doesn't work that way. My vacation in a European capital city ended with a string of catastrophic luck. My flight was cancelled and I wouldn't get a new one for 3 days. The airline flaked out on the emergency accommodation they were supposed to provide in these situations. The only place that would fit into my already overstretched budget was a bunk in a 10-bed hostel, hours from the airport. And then my bus broke down in the middle of a sleepy suburban area. On the brink of snapping completely, it's amazing how stressful travel can make us for something that's meant to be relaxing. I set off on foot, not entirely sure what I was hoping to find. I was in a housing estate, far from tourist areas, but I couldn't stand being in that crowded, overheated bus, waiting to be taken somewhere I didn't want to go. So I walked, and I walked. It was almost midnight when I spotted it. It was on a street corner, tucked into a spacious lot, a quaint storybook building with red brick walls and a peaked roof. Every window glowed with a welcoming light, and a little wisp of chimney smoke rose into the night sky above it. I hurried towards the building and saw the sign, The Overnight. I stared at it. The Overnight? The Overnight, the one from the stories? But then I shook my head, feeling a bit foolish. No, of course it wasn't. It couldn't be. The stories were an urban legend, and it was a pretty generic name for a guest house. All the same, I hurried inside. It was open, it looked cozy and clean, and according to the sign in the window, there was one vacancy. The front door brought me into a neat, charming reception area. A fire crackled in the hearth, and quiet music was coming from somewhere, a song that tickled at the back of my memory and stirred up very early, very faint recollections of a childhood vacation at a beach somewhere. The paintings around the walls were of serene woodland scenes. I approached the front desk feeling buoyantly happy and hoping like hell the rooms weren't too expensive. There was no one there. I waited for 5 minutes. I tried calling out. Nothing. Finally, I spotted the clipboard sitting on the desk. Welcome to The Overnight. We hope you enjoy your stay with us. Your room is waiting. Please read all conditions carefully, as signing this document constitutes a binding pact. Your first night is guaranteed. Restful sleep on subsequent nights cannot be assured. Longer stays will incur additional ablation. Guest name had my name written in it. Phone number had my phone number. Address had my address. Maximum stay, 9,999 nights. Charge, $0. At the time, I didn't notice any of the odd things about the document. I was too preoccupied with the fact that it had my phone number and address on it, and that it seemed to be promising me an unlimited stay for free, which meant that this was the overnight from the stories. It was real. I had found it, and by God, I was going to stay in it. I happily circled Y for towel service, snatched up the key next to the clipboard, and carried my bag upstairs, tiptoeing in case I woke anyone. Once I left the reception area behind, it was completely silent. My room was unbelievable. It was like stepping into the suite of a 5-star hotel. The furniture was rustic and looked handmade and of the highest quality. The bathroom was larger than my bedroom back home, with a huge standing tub and a heated floor. A small stack of neatly folded towels was waiting for me on the bed, along with a little embossed card, "Towel Service." That gave me a moment's pause. How had the towels got into my room so quickly? I had just signed the form a minute ago. No one would have had time to read it and bring towels up, especially not without me noticing. I shrugged it off. Maybe the cleaning staff just left them here after the previous guest left. I dumped my bag in the corner, got undressed and slipped right into bed, which was like sinking into a cloud. There was a painting facing the bed. It was one of those vintage fairy tale scenes, with fairies in gossamer dresses flitting around a forest. The benign, welcoming smiles were the last things I saw before I closed my eyes. As I fell asleep, I wondered why no one in the stories ever stayed here more than one night. That night was the most restful I've ever had. I fell almost at once into a deep, dreamless sleep and woke the next morning feeling more rested than I had in years. Outside my door, I found a breakfast tray bearing one of the most delicious meals I've ever eaten. I devoured it, then got dressed and went downstairs, intent on meeting whoever was running this place. Of course, there was no one there. That was part of the story. No one ever met the staff. I toyed with the idea of opening the door behind the front desk, the one with the staff-only plaque, but I thought better of it. Instead, I headed out for a day on the town. And what a town it was. I had found my way into a delightful little suburban area. It must have once been a village before being swallowed by the city and had retained a lot of its country charm. I visited old churches, ate in a quaint cafe, and strolled through hidden woodland trails near the park. Everyone I met was friendly and smiled at me as I passed, my backpack marking me out as a tourist. I would have explored the town more, but as the afternoon approached, I began to feel slightly run down, the way you do when you've got a bad cold coming on. And I discovered a large, partially healed gash on my arm. I couldn't understand how I hadn't noticed it before, as it looked like it would have bled quite badly before it started healing. I had been frazzled the last few days as my travel plans collapsed, but was it possible to be that distracted? When I got back to the hotel, it had changed. In the red-hued light of the settling sun, the building seemed to have aged by 20 years. The roof was missing tiles, the walls were stained with bird crap, the windows needed cleaning, and there was no smoke coming from the chimney. It looked shabby and dilapidated. If I had seen it like this the previous night, I wouldn't have given it a second glance. A man happened to walk by as I was staring at my wonder hotel, perplexed, and it turned out he spoke a little English. I asked him how long the hotel had been there. The question had a curious effect on him. His eyes went slack and unfocused, and he stared through me, as though he were looking at someone standing just behind me. "Oh, it's always been here. A long time. Very long time." "Is it usually a nice place?" I asked. He swayed a little. "We don't like the screaming." "What?" I said, certain I must have misheard him. "They scream." His voice became slurred and difficult to make out. "You hear them scream." I backed away slowly as his mouth opened and his tongue lolled out, assuming he was drunk or high on something. As I approached the hotel's front door, his voice followed me. "Very long time." Inside, the reception area had changed. It was dark and dingy and smelled slightly of damp. That familiar song was playing again, but distorted and out of tune, as though it were coming through faulty sound equipment. The woodland paintings now looked dark and menacing. I couldn't understand it. My joy at not having to sleep in a hostel the previous night had probably coloured my perceptions, but this did not look like the same hotel I had checked into less than 24 hours earlier. I went up to my room feeling disappointed and put out. As I passed other doors, I heard low scuffling noises and quiet voices. My room, despite being colder than it had been the previous night, seemed just as luxurious as I had left it that morning. At least, it did at first. As I got ready for bed, I noticed that everything in the room was slightly askew. The shades on the lamps were tilted. The painting was crooked. The doors of the wardrobe didn't close properly. I tried to draw a bath, but the water that came out of the tap was lightly tinged with brown. Someone had left towels for me again, but this time they had simply flung them in a pile on the bed. The note on top, "Towel Service," was handwritten in a childish scrawl. I had a lot of trouble sleeping that night. Paranoid, nonsensical fears preyed at my mind. I couldn't stop imagining that someone was hiding in the large wardrobe, or that I'd turn over and find a figure standing next to my bed. Someone kept walking past the door of my room, making the floorboards squeak. I didn't have the courage to open the door and tell them to stop. Once, around midnight, I was finally nodding off, only to be brought to a startling, heart-thumping wakefulness by a sudden scream close to my room. I sat up and listened, blood rushing in my temples, but I didn't hear anything else. I chalked it up to my spooked brain playing tricks on me. Finally, at 4 a.m, I fell asleep. I had frightening dreams of dark corridors and forests, and woke the next morning feeling exhausted and depleted. I was not surprised to find that my breakfast was undercooked and had a sour, slightly rancid tinge. I consoled myself with the fact that at least I had the quaint little town to explore, but it too had changed. Under a veil of dreary rain, the town seemed like a bleak, urban metastasis, the charm of the original village all but crushed beneath the featureless concrete. How had I not noticed the car parks and the grim overpasses? The roads were clogged with traffic, there was litter everywhere, the people looked poor and miserable, and the churches and cafes were all run down and badly maintained. I retreated to the park, but I couldn't find the walking trails that had led away so invitingly into the woods the previous day. And a man followed me as I trudged around in the rain, always at a distance. He had bright red hair that was very uncharacteristic of the rest of the local population, and his face looked strange. His mouth was too wide, his eyes set too far apart, his nose too long and sharp. I never saw him moving, but any time I stopped to look at my surroundings, there he'd be, watching me. I didn't spend long in the town. The rain and the gloomy surroundings made me slightly depressed, and I was starting to feel sick again. I found another healed cut right next to the first. I walked back to the hotel, fully expecting to find that it had transformed into an abandoned wreck, but I rounded the corner and got a pleasant surprise. It was no worse than it had been the previous evening. In fact, the illuminated windows seemed positively welcoming in the rain, which was getting steadily worse. I stepped cautiously into the reception area. The fire was lit, and someone had dusted and tidied since that morning. The room seemed brighter, the paintings were neither welcoming nor menacing. When I got to my room, My towels were waiting for me, neatly folded. This time there was no card. As I picked them up to put them in the bathroom, I recoiled. They looked clean, but they smelled strongly of mold and damp. I know what you're going to say when you read about my last night. Why did I stay? Why didn't I leave? And you're right. I just got complacent. I should have paid more attention to the creepy things happening to me. I should have given more thought to sleeping in an impossible, seemingly supernatural hotel. And most of all, I should have read the document on that clipboard more carefully. Here's something I only found out after the fact. Ablation is an archaic word. It means sacrifice. As soon as I woke up, I knew something was wrong. A cold wind was blowing into the room, and I could hear the sound of wood creaking and groaning. I groped for the bedside lamp, but it wasn't there. Instead, I grabbed my phone. The room had utterly transformed. It was roughly the same size and shape, but the walls were made out of bare plaster and the floors were raw, unvarnished boards. Out the window, skeletal tree branches danced in a high wind. There hadn't been any trees outside the hotel when I went to sleep. I opened the door to the hall, my head still fuzzy with sleep. My hand left the doorknob slick and warm. Blood ran down my arm. The hallway outside was as bare and undecorated as my room. My luggage was gone. I went out into a pitch-black corridor wearing nothing but my t-shirt and boxer shorts, using my phone's flashlight to see where I was going. The hallway was far longer than it had been before, so long that the light from my phone didn't reach all the way down it in either direction, and it was studded with open doorways. Sounds were coming from some of them, humming, singing, the clank of a piano being played badly. I crept down the hallway, looking for a staircase. Every time I passed an open doorway, I hid the light from my phone. I didn't want to be seen by whatever was inside. The building seemed to go on forever. I turned a corner, then another corner, and still the hallway and its open doors stretched on and on. Rapid, creaking footsteps came from above, as though someone was running around on the second floor. A second floor that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. Finally, I found a staircase leading down. The reception area was like my room, the same layout as the one I had seen last, but bare and barren. A single candle glowed next to the front desk. A set of shelves next to the desk bore dozens of small jars, filled with something that looked black in the light of the candles but was revealed by my makeshift flashlight to be dark red. I was busy being horrified by this when I realized that the door behind the desk was open. Actually, there was no door at all anymore, just an open passage leading to another dark hallway. I'm still not sure what possessed me to lean across the desk and shine my light down the corridor. Maybe the thought that the exit was in sight and I was therefore able to escape any time I wanted. Whatever the reason, I did it, and I nearly paid for it with my life. The red-haired man from the park suddenly appeared, his elongated face starkly lit by the phone flashlight. For a moment, he looked as surprised to see me as I was to see him. Then his face twisted in rage, and he screamed. I turned and ran. I could hear him shrieking behind me, shouting in a language I didn't recognize. When I looked over my shoulder, just as I reached the door, he was right behind me. Either he moved with unnatural speed, or he could teleport or something. I felt his hand scrabble at the back of my t-shirt as I wrenched the front door open and ran out into the night. Tires screeched, light filled my vision. Something slammed into my hips, and I went down heavily onto wet asphalt. I blinked and looked around. I was lying in the middle of an unfamiliar city street. I slowly turned my head to look at the building I had just escaped from, but it was gone. In its place stood a small, modern business hotel with a glowing sign above the front door, the overnight. As the driver of the car who hit me got out and started berating me for running out in front of him, a harassed-looking businesswoman pulling a wheeled case in her wake walked quickly towards the hotel. I held up a hand and tried to tell her to stop, but my voice died in my throat. The automatic doors hissed open, revealing a stylish, minimalistic lobby. The woman stepped through, and the doors closed behind her. I'll spare you all the details of what happened after that, but getting home was an ordeal. I had emerged into not just another city, but another country, and my embassy wasn't thrilled about getting me out of there when I couldn't explain to them how I had gotten in, much less half naked and covered in blood. Getting hit by the car was a blessing in disguise, since they took pity on me in the end. While I was being treated for my injuries, I got an answer to the question I had asked myself during my first night at the hotel. See, I remember spending 3 nights and 2 days at the overnight. But according to the newspapers, calendars, my phone, and the dozens or so people I asked over and over again, less than 7 hours had passed since I checked in. According to them, I only stayed 1 night. I just want to thank Grace Omega for allowing me to narrate this story. If you liked what you heard here, head over to their Reddit page and show them some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.